Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for the Highway 120 open house. This meeting is being recorded so that other residents who are unavailable to attend tonight can review the recording later. If you do not want your image captured during this meeting, please turn off your camera. To opt out of this recorded meeting, please exit now. A recording of this meeting will be available for viewing on the project website in 5 to 7 business days. When it is posted, send any questions or comments to the project team. I'd like to start off by going over a few logistics before we jump right in. Please note that you are muted and your video is disabled. We ask that you keep your video off to save bandwidth. Please feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions or make comments throughout the session. We'll have an opportunity for Q&A at the end of the meeting, where we'll request that you raise your hand to speak out loud. In the meantime, to access the chat box, please click on the chat bubble in the lower right-hand corner. You can see where the little hand there. Please share your comments with everyone. If you'd rather call in your questions, please call 763-219-5503 to speak with one of our project team members. So with that, we'll kind of go over a brief agenda of what we're going to cover at tonight's meeting. We'll start out with some introductions, and then we'll go through the purpose of the study, kind of a study overview. Then we'll talk about the problem identification and what problems were identified as we went through the study. Then we'll have a little polling activity. So please have your phone or an additional device handy, and we'll go through that. Then we'll get into the evaluation criteria, how we're planning on evaluating the alternatives that are developed for this corridor. Then we'll have another polling activity after that, a brief polling activity. Then we're going to talk about the community engagement approach moving forward at the end. So with that, the focus for tonight is we're looking for confirmation on the problems we're trying to solve. So what we're trying to get from the public tonight is, do you agree with the problems and concerns that were identified with the project team? And we'd also like some input on any of the evaluation criteria and questions that we've identified to evaluate the alternatives moving forward. So tonight you're listening to Ryan Coddington. I'm the project manager for MnDOT. The next person that will be talking is Brandy Popenhagen. She is the project manager for HDR on this phase of the study. And then the first person you heard who was introducing you, the countdown to the start of the meeting, was Kurt Behringer from HDR as well. Also on the call tonight, we have Adam Josephson, who is the East Area Manager for MnDOT. We also have Denise Workcuff, who is our Public Affairs Coordinator for the East Area. Also, we gave you the phone number, so Shi Yang from New Publica will be also taking your call-in questions and relaying them to the project team as we move forward with the meeting tonight. So with that, I will turn it over to Brandy for the project overview.
Hello, Brandy Popenhagen. I'm here to talk to you about some of the technical information that we looked at and identifying the problems on the corridor. So go to the next slide. So again, as we mentioned, what we're trying to show you today are the problems that we have identified on this corridor, and this is based on what we've heard so far from the public, as well as the data that we've evaluated. We've also, based on those problems, are looking at how do we evaluate solutions moving forward? So what measures success as far as what we should do with this corridor moving forward? So we have those two main questions we want to make sure we ask from you today. So an overview of the project location. This is Highway 120, also known as Century Avenue, also known as other names as well. The project is on the south end, starting at I-94. And then at the north end, it ends at 694. Some have asked why the project limits don't go further north. And the reason why is that there was a study that was done in 2012 for the area near Century College. So that's why we're ending at 694. So early in summer of 2020, MnDOT, along with Federal Highway, had decided that with the pavement project that is expected for the corridor, that they should look at the corridor in more depth to try to see if there's any other improvements they should be considering as they consider that pavement project. So what they decided to do is embark on what's called a planning and environmental linkages study. And what this study does is it sort of sets up this project so that we are not only just looking at what the future vision of the corridor is, but also what are the potential impacts, environmental impacts. So we look at those key transportation issues and priorities along the corridor. We also couple that with what are the potential impacts or environmental concerns that we need to consider. And we also want to make sure that we're talking to all of you so that we have a good understanding of what this corridor needs to be. There are 5 main steps in what a planning environmental linkages study, or a PEL, that we refer to. The first is to really just decide that we're going to do a PEL. And the reason why we have to have that key decision point is that we engage Federal Highway Administration. A lot of times the improvements that we will propose will have federal money. So this helps to get them engaged in our project very early on. So first of all, we all decide, yes, we should do this type of study. The second thing we do is where we're at today is really get very clear information about the problems of the corridor. If we don't know what the problems we're trying to solve are, then we wouldn't come up with very good solutions. And we have to get concurrence on that by Federal Highway. The next thing we do is consider a range of alternatives. There are many different ways you can solve a problem on any kind of roadway. So we have to look at a lot of different ways to solve these problems. So we call them our alternative solutions. And then we evaluate how well did those alternative solutions fix the problems, as well as what are the kind of impacts we would expect for those alternative solutions. And we compare them against each other to decide what should move forward. And we wrap that all up finally in a study report, so that is sort of the vision that we're going to identify for the corridor for future projects, any future projects that would move forward. So what happens after we finish up our PEL study? Well, we have a good idea of what those projects should be. So we also have a good idea of how much they would cost. So we can start to identify how to fund them. And then we can advance projects, or a project, it could be multiple, into the next phase of environmental review, work with the communities on that very specific design. And then finally, at the end of the day, we construct a project or many projects. It just really depends on how much money or funding we would need to have in order for construction. And that timeline is unknown. Again, it's really dependent on how much money, the funding sources that we can get. Right, Kurt?
Yeah, thank you, Brandy. So next we'll go over kind of what we've heard. So summer 2020, most of you probably saw or participated in our survey or our online discussion. So I'll be highlighting what we heard from that initial engagement. So some major takeaways from the initial public survey and discussion boards that happened online in 2020. Here you see the results of some of the top issues that came out of that engagement. The most popular one was the need for more accommodations for bicycles, pedestrians, and individuals using wheelchairs. The next one was to address traffic flow and safety issues at the intersections. Those are the top 2. Some other ones of mention were to update and add turn lanes and passing lanes, and also to make sure that the width of the road is adequate for traffic levels. So during these discussions back in 2020, we heard kind of 2 competing perspectives about what the purpose of Highway 120 is. The one on the left here is whether or not to make Highway 120 more of a strategic artery that can handle more and faster traffic and be a connector of the interstates and accommodate more of that through traffic, or on the flip side, on the right, to keep Highway 120 as a country road and design it more for the local community, safe for different modes of travel, whether you're driving in a car, riding a bike, or walking. And so it's easy for folks to access some resources and local businesses in the area. We also conducted focus groups and some targeted engagement to some students at Century College, residents of Landfall and Rolling Hills, and BIPOC, or Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, residents, workers, and businesses along the corridor. And very similar to our other two methods of engagement, we heard that there's a lack of sidewalks and shoulders and bike lanes, crosswalks, that it's risky and unsafe for pedestrians and bicyclists to travel down Century Avenue. There's bad lighting, traffic goes too fast. There's a lack of turn lanes, and there's some street light timing issues. So the four main points that came out of all the comments and engagement that we heard and did in 2020 was the roadway needs to be safer for people to walk and roll and bicycle. There's too much congestion related to vehicle volumes. Folks brought up questions about wanting to understand what is possible to achieve on this corridor, this highway, within a reasonable budget and without avoiding and without affecting a lot of surrounding properties. And finally, wanted some more clarification on the purpose of the road. So kind of those two competing themes that I talked about a couple slides back. What's the main use of the road? What is this roadway for? And with that, I'll turn it back over to Brandy to discuss our problem identification process.
Thank you. So after hearing your input, we also really took a really deep dive into the data that's available to us to evaluate those problems that we heard from you. And we came up with four very key problems that the data supports along this corridor. There's definitely a vehicle safety issue out here. A lot of crashes. This corridor has, from a crash rate perspective, is greater than other roads similar to it. Walking and bicycling is definitely not very good out here. It doesn't feel safe or comfortable. From a congestion perspective, we really saw that the problem is really concentrated at Highway 36, and there's other few key spots that we should consider, but it's really not corridor wide. It's not the entire corridor. It's not really backups along the entire road. And then the pavement condition is in really poor shape, which was really the impetus of why we even decided to look at this corridor. So to go through the safety issues, we looked at where are these crashes happening, and most of them, 76%, are happening at intersections. And if you know the roadway, there's plenty of intersections, plenty of driveways. And the type of crashes that we see the most out here are rear ends. And that is very commonly correlated with so many driveways. So both of these statistics really help us understand that all these driveways and these intersections that are unsignalized are really contributing to the number of crashes that exist out here. Next slide. And what this graph is showing you, that anything in red is an area of pretty big concern for us, meaning that when we calculate the crash rate, either along the roadway or at critical intersections, so along the roadway would be the line along the roadway, and then critical intersections would be the circles at the intersections. Those crashes that we see there in the years that we evaluated them exceed what we consider a critical crash rate, or it's pretty significant, meaning when you compare it to an average roadway that's like this one, it's quite a bit higher. So you can see a lot of this roadway is quite a bit higher than roadways that are similar to it. You can see concentrations over there by 36, and then here quite a bit in the southern section of the roadway. And then you've got areas there by 94. There's also a section by Stillwater Road into the north at 27th. That section has what's considered statistically high fatal and serious injury crashes. So those are even more concerning for us. We definitely don't want to see a high number of those. And then we've got another intersection, two intersections where we see that as well. One at the 94 ramps, and one over at Maryland. Next slide. And what we realize about this corridor is that there's just so many ways to get on and off of it, or the access points. It could be driveways or street intersections. In fact, when we look at how this roadway compares to what we would consider more of an ideal design, where we usually would see or would want to see about 20 accesses per mile, we've got about 49 on this roadway per mile. And we do know that when you have more access points, when you start to exceed a certain threshold, that crashes usually also happen as well. There's just so many unpredictable turning movements on this roadway, making it less safe. Next slide. So moving on to biking and walking, we do, and we hear it and we've experienced it, that this this roadway feels like difficult to cross, and as well as walking or biking along it. It's also doesn't have very good access to transit, meaning the stops at the bus stops are not very firm, making it not a very good area for accessing a bus. Next slide. And so the one way to measure this is we can actually measure level of service along a roadway. And this one is level of service for biking. So the darker the color along the roadway is the more poor, it's less desirable or more poorer level of service. So you can see a lot of darker colors along the roadway. Plus we can measure the level of service for each intersection. So we've got a lot of level service F's and E's for crossing this roadway if you're a bicyclist. So there's definitely the data that we look at is telling us that this roadway is pretty stressful if you're a bicycle for crossing as well as riding along it. Next slide. And the same exists for walking. Again, walking along this roadway we can consider how this feels as a user by looking at vehicle speeds, how close you are to vehicles. A lot of the area of this roadway, you have to be on the roadway or walking in the grass alongside it in order to walk along it. So it doesn't score very well from a level of service either. It's got a lot of oranges on here and some F's, as well as crossings. Although it's a little better than the bicyclists, there's still a lot of D's out here for crossing the roadway for walking conditions. So again, this is a major issue that we believe we need to address. Next slide. And what this slide is showing us is that not only is a roadway, we can measure, how does the roadway feel from a user perspective if you're walking or biking, but also what's the likelihood of people wanting to use the roadway for that? And that's what this is. The darker the color, the more likely that people really do need to use this roadway for biking and walking. And the way we measure that is we look at the demographics of the area, meaning are there zero-car households? Is there low income? Is there a lot of transit along the corridor? Of course, if there's transit along the corridor, you certainly need to get to it. As well as, are there other major destinations in the corridor, which we're trying to point out here, like schools, parks, reasons for people to walk and bike. So we do show, and it's just the way these hexagons sort of work out on this map, that, this, and we look at it from a hexagon perspective. Anyway, that a lot of this corridor is pretty dark, and it's very desirable to walk and bike along this corridor. Next slide. So then what we took all that information and we tried to pinpoint key areas. So the circles represent, areas where we really need to think about, how are we fixing like the crossings? We really need to focus, how do we fix crossings along, in these key areas where we're circling, and as well as, the entire corridor, which is dashed in like a red and orange line, is that the whole corridor, we need to make sure that we do something to make sure that walking and bicycling mode, it has a safe place to travel. Next slide. So moving on to traffic conditions, I know that the question of one of the questions that we received is, well, what is the purpose of this roadway? Well, when we look at traffic conditions on this roadway, we don't see a lot of congestion. However, if you look at the Highway 36 area, there is a lot. There's a lot of the queuing along that section of roadway does go pretty far, especially north on Highway 120. And that's what that smaller line represents. That's what's happening today. And you can also see some queuing of cars on various streets as well, like Minnehaha and, oh, I can't read that one. I think it's Crosby, as well as over by the 94 area. The larger squares represent what we expect the queuing might be as traffic grows out here. So we don't only look at what is happening today, but what happens if we do nothing in the next 20 years. So we would expect those larger square areas for that queuing to grow. So you can really see a growth there at Highway 36 as well as over at 94. Although I would say that we don't anticipate the future growth to be quite a lot on this roadway. It's pretty built up and there's other routes for people to go. So we aren't really seeing, this huge congestion-wide problem on this roadway. In fact, when we look at how people use this roadway today, they aren't on it for much more than a mile. So they're not really using it as this major thoroughfare to get from one end to the other. They're not on it for very long at all, in fact. All right, next slide. And then finally, I think anybody would be aware if they're on this roadway that the pavement is in poor condition. In fact, it's so poor that it's approaching the end of its useful life. So we really do need to improve that pavement condition as we go forward. Next slide. So those are the major problems. We walked through the 4 major problems, but that's not the only thing you need to consider when you think about what to do with the roadway. We also have to make sure that any improvements we do or that we make sure that this roadway is compatible with the American Disabilities Act. We also have to make sure that it drains effectively and cleans the stormwater that exists on the road. In fact, there may be some areas where there are drainage issues. We also want to make sure that anything we do to this roadway is compatible or we're considering other projects around it. We want to make sure, as was mentioned in some earlier questions, is that we have something that we can afford to build and that it makes sense, it's cost effective, and that we're using our money wisely, funding wisely. And finally, we want to make sure that we're considering improvements that are future-proof, that are going to work with the next generation of vehicles or other things that might support a roadway. So consider that smart corridor idea. Next slide. Other topics to be assessed. We do know that we have Black and African American, Asian and Hispanic Latino minority groups along this corridor. We want to make sure that improvements that we are looking at are equitable amongst all users. We know that the right-of-way out here in some areas is pretty narrow at 66 feet. And we want to consider those right-of-way impacts when we think about what we add to this roadway. If there's any sort of widening, how does that affect adjacent properties? There's also some natural resources out here like parks, or I should say wetlands. There's other resources like parks. So we want to consider our environment as well. And then there's some major utility lines out here that could really be a constraint for improvements. So we have to consider that as we move forward. Next slide. So just to reiterate, the 4 major transportation problems that we are trying to solve or resolve on this corridor is to make it safer for vehicles, to make it safer and more comfortable and user-friendly for walking and bicycling, to address those major backups at Highway 36 and those other key locations that we showed you earlier, and also make sure that that pavement is improved so that it can last for quite a bit longer. longer. So the purpose of this roadway is to improve safety, as it's kind of reiterating what we said, improve walking and bicycling, and reduce backups at key locations while making the pavement last for the next 20 years. So again, going back to, what is the purpose of this roadway? It's not necessarily to make it a thoroughfare. At least that's not what the data is telling us. We really do have these three main, mobility, or I would say, user experiences for 1, 2, and 3, and that pavement really does have to get fixed if it's going to be a usable roadway. All right.
Great, thank you, Brandy. All right, up next, we're going to do kind of a fun live polling activities that Ryan had mentioned from the beginning. So I'll ask folks to get their phones out, or you can access this through another tab in your browser. Open this preview view here. So screen on the left is going to be the presenter screen. I'm just going to walk us through some instructions here, and then we'll have you sign in. If you've done this before and want to go ahead and sign in already, and you're a pro, then go ahead and move forward. Screen here on the right is indicating what you'll see on your phone once you get into it. And once you get in, go ahead and hit this heart right here. We've got a few folks doing that right now. That'll let us know that you are in the meeting and that you've logged in okay. You can also, and I'll show an example here of going to another tab in your browser, type in menti.com, and that's where you'll type in the 8-digit code. So I'm going to get out of this presenter screen and go to this one right here. And go ahead and join. Once again, hit that heart once you're in. We'll give folks a few minutes to get logged in. And no worries if you're not able to participate in Menti right now, if you don't have a smartphone or unable to get it to work on your computer. We can have you participate later on the web page. We do have a live survey up there right now that'll ask a lot of these similar questions that we're going to go through. And that survey will be available through February 16th on the project web page. Also, if you'd like to participate but you can't get in, you can submit some comments and questions into the meeting chat as well. So we've got about 30 or so signed in. We've got over 100 participants online so far, so I might just give this a few more minutes, maybe a couple more minutes for folks to get in there. See if we can get that number up to 40. There's 37. All right, there's 40. We'll go ahead and move forward here. These instructions will remain on the top of the screen. If you are still trying to join and need that code, that'll be right up here at the top. All right, so our first question. So from everything that Brandy just explained, did we identify the right problems to address on this stretch of Highway 120 Century Avenue? Yes or no question, go ahead and select your answer and hit submit. If you don't hit submit, it won't record live. So far, we're getting all yeses, a couple no's. That's good. That's why we're here tonight. We want to confirm that we are identifying the right problems, and if there's any that we're missing, we want to know what those are as well. We're also getting a few more things dumped into the chat, so thank you for doing that as well. We'll get to those during the Q&A session at the end. All right, we're up to about 47 responses here. That number's still climbing, so I'll give folks a couple more seconds. All right, great. Looking like we're sticking right around that 2% no and 98% yes. So appears that we have identified, for the most part, the right problems. All right, moving on to our next question here. Now this one's different. It'll ask you on your screen to type in your answer. You'll be able to type in 3 at a time, and then you can hit submit 3 more times. So 9 answers total if you have enough to say. Are there any problems missing that you feel are important? And if there are, what are those problems? So I know most of you did say, yes, we have identified any, but are there any others that you think need to be addressed on Century Avenue? All right, these are live answers coming in into the word cloud. If there are any repeats, those will become bigger in this word cloud. So it looks like so far we have all unique answers. I'm seeing turn lanes as an important problem. Others are moving around a little too fast for me to. Speed is also coming to the forefront here. The 36 intersection. Backups, width. Multiple governments involved. See a few comments about access to homes and businesses. A few more about the Highway 36 intersection. That one's getting bigger in the middle there. Still moving around, a few more answers coming through. Thanks everyone for putting in your thoughts. These are really helpful for us. I feel like we need a little background music here too. I haven't figured out that part of the technology, but maybe on a future meeting. Speed, I think I've said that one. 3M. A lot of comments about 36. Seeing about 10 different ways folks are making comments about that. So I think if you combined all that into one, 36 might be the biggest one right now. All right. Looks like we've got around 80 or so responses. Give 10 more seconds here to get in your final thoughts. All right. Okay, so that is it for this round of Mentimeter. We will be doing one more round of this after Brandy explains our next section. So I'll leave this open here if you want to keep populating this. These will be recorded and we'll have a report that comes out from this activity that we will use in our study. So I'll go ahead and reshare the PowerPoint. Go ahead and stay logged into that Mentimeter. If you get kicked off of it or anything, we'll start the next round of this with that instruction slide so we can get everybody logged back in. And with that, I will pass it back over to Brandy.
All right. So we use this term evaluation criteria. What it is we're trying to identify measures You know, how do we measure success of whether or not we solve those, you know, 4 key problems that we talked to you about? And there's a lot of different ways, you know, when we look at alternatives, there's 100 different ways you can look at how to fix a road, but they don't all do the same thing. And so we try to come up with what is this criteria that we are going to use to evaluate these alternatives against each other. So we can go to the next slide. So one of the first things we need to do is sort of section out the roadway. And the reason why we do that is because the roadway, you know, it's kind of long. It's about, I think, around 7 miles or 6. But it does, you know, it's got different characteristics as you drive from south to north. And that it doesn't, so that what that means is we don't necessarily need the same solution the entire way. So we try to come up with different sections of the roadway that would have sort of consistent solutions for that section. But it could change when you get to the next section. And the way we do that is we look at, well, what does that roadway like and behave like in these different sections? Can we come up with clear differences? Usually it's how dense are the houses next to it or businesses? Is it really commercial in one area versus another? Does it feel a little more rural in another area? They all might have very different solutions. So that's the first thing we do. We found 4 major sections of this roadway, definitely different lengths. And then we kind of took Highway 36 as its own area, spot location that we really need to concentrate on. Next slide. And then we look at various solutions, and we're going to look at it at 2 different levels of analysis. So the first level of analysis is we're going to ask just a few questions, about 10 of them. And if it doesn't, like, it's more of a kind of a yes/no kind of evaluation. Like if it doesn't sort of, if we look at these alternative solutions and we compare them against each other, and a lot of them have sort of negatives versus a lot of them have positives, we want to remove those right away and not look at them anymore, and take the ones we push forward into this next level of analysis, where we're going to ask even more questions about how well the alternative is solving the problem and what are the impacts as a result. And we're going to have a lot more detail when we go into that next, but we're going to have a lot fewer alternatives that we're looking at. So the first one is more high level, and the second one is more detail with fewer alternative solutions. Next slide. So again, this first level evaluation is just higher level. Does this vision or solution address the problems and considerations that we have already described to you? And we'll go into more detail on that. So we have about 10 different questions we're going to ask. I think it's about 9. And we're going to ask them a little bit of more of a high level. So we're not going to have a lot of, I would say, modeling or detailed analysis. But, you know, for instance, vehicle safety, if we were to do this X thing, do we know that we would improve vehicle safety? We have certain things we can look at it and whether to do that it would actually reduce crashes. Does this solution improve walking and bicycling along the corridor? Kind of a yes/no. Do we address that congestion issue that we've identified and many of you have identified at Highway 120 and 36? Does it fix the pavement? Do we think that the solution is going to be pretty expensive? Like, meaning, are we adding a ton of lanes? Are we adding a lot of infrastructure compared to another solution? Are we having any kind of visual impact to minority and low-income environmental justice populations? We just want to make sure that anything we're doing isn't disproportionately impacting those populations along the corridor. Would we have a pretty severe impact to those major utility lines, those transmission lines? Because that's a pretty big project constraint. Right away, it's narrow out here. Would we expect very substantial right-of-way impacts with one solution versus another? And lastly, are we going to substantially increase the hard surface out there, meaning we would have a lot more water we would have to treat on an alternative versus another? So again, we're going to ask all these questions about each, we're talking many solutions that we're going to throw on the table. And we're going to try to use these questions to help us screen out many of them so we can go to the next level of evaluation where we're going to get a lot more detailed. Next slide. So level 2, we're going to take those fewer alternative solutions and we're going to really look deep at them and have pretty deep data and questions that we're going to answer. And we'll go through those. Next slide. So the questions that we asked before over on the left-hand side are repeated right here. However, we're going to go into greater detail. So we're going to do traffic modeling. We're going to do safety modeling. We can actually predict, that we would reduce crashes by X% with one solution versus another. We'll calculate the right-of-way impacts in areas and how many potential relocations we might have as an, our effect. As a result of a solution. We can even go back, and if you recall, we looked at level of service for walking and biking. We can do that again and see if we've improved it substantially from what exists out there today. We'll do detailed cost estimates on the corridor solutions, and we'll even look at how well we are addressing those congested areas, specifically at 36 and some of those other areas that we showed on previous slides. And then we're going to add on the right side of the screen a lot more questions. And these are going to be related to some of those additional considerations that we need to think about. Are we improving access to transit, like, that firm boarding surface, making it easier to get onto the bus and get to the bus? Is it cost effective? Are these benefits that we are trying to get by solving these problems better or greater, I should say, than the cost of the solution? Are we going to affect any parks along the corridor? Are we going to uncover potential contaminated materials that we would have to address? How are we dealing with other water resources such as wetlands and protected waters that may be out here? Are we affecting them? Culture resources, that means are there historical properties that we need to be concerned about that we would affect with our solution? Same with the threatened endangered species. Are there protected species out there that we need to evaluate whether or not we're affecting those? Are we going to make this corridor more noisy? Or is one solution potentially more noisy than the other? With traffic noise, meaning are we creating a more noisy environment? And then also, like, how is the quality experience from a user perspective for biking and walking and even the driver? Is this a more desirable place to be in one alternative versus the other? That's sort of that experience. We call it visual quality. So that we'll add those questions as well, and we'll take all of this information and compare what's remaining, these alternatives that are left, and we will select a couple that really help us define what the solution, or I would say the vision of this corridor will be, so that in the next, our projects can move forward into the next phases of the design. Next slide.
All right, great.
Okay,
thanks, Brandy. Yep. And as promised, we'll go back to our Mentimeter. I'm going to flip it back to the opening slide here, just in case folks got knocked off of it or would like to try to access it one more time. Getting a few more folks clicking that heart. Thank you for letting us know you're in. We're up to 52 now. Give folks a few more seconds here. That's great. We're over 60 now. Excellent. All right, we'll give it 10 more seconds. So these next three questions are going to be all about the evaluation criteria that Brandy just walked us through. All right, we're going to move forward here. I'm going to skip the first couple questions we asked. That data has been recorded. All right. First question of this section. Do the evaluation questions make sense? Yes or no? Getting a lot of yeses there. Again, make sure you're hitting submit once you've selected your answer. All right, hearing a lot of yeses. That's great. Moving on to our next question. One more yes or no question. Are there any other topics that we should be evaluating? Brandy walked us through the level 1 and the level 2 evaluations. Anything else that you think needs to be added to our evaluation? This one's a little more split between yes and no's. Majority saying no. All right, great. Our final question here. Thanks again for participating. This will be another word cloud with multiple options to submit different words and phrases. So what other topics should we be evaluating? There were quite a few of you that said yes in that last question. What are we missing there? What else? Once we have a few different options, a few different designs for Highway 120, what else do we need to be evaluating those different options on to make sure we have the best possible future for Highway 120? So far, cost is the most popular answer. I'm seeing a few other things come in here. Community support, property needs, traffic impacts, plowing and maintenance, school bus stops, that's a new one, that's good. Nature center access, someone put that one in. Some concerns about possible property loss with the improvements that are made. Daytime congestion. These are great, keep them coming. And another nature center access in there. Bike alternatives. That one's getting a little traction right now. Loss of trees. Future development and economic vitality. I think those kind of go hand in hand. A few comments about trees, making sure that the big older trees are protected if possible. All right, we'll give it 10 more seconds here for any final thoughts. Word cloud kind of looks like a fish right now. I don't know if that means anything, but oh, that didn't last long. Noise concerns, that's a good one. And we did have that on our list. that Brandy discussed. So that's good that there's concern on that. Through traffic on 36, 1.1. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our next slide. If you want to keep this open on your end and continue to populate more responses, please do. Thanks once again for participating. So up next, I'll talk about our public engagement approach for this current phase of engagement. So this meeting video tonight that's being recorded, it will be placed online for those able not to attend, or if you'd like to go back and revisit the discussion, you'll be able to do that. That video should be online sometime early next week. There's also an opportunity to take a survey, which I will copy into the chat right now. Here's what that survey looks like. Once again, the survey will be up through the 16th, and that link is now available for everyone in the chat. And once again, that survey has a lot of the same things that we've talked about here tonight, giving folks an opportunity to respond to the different criteria that we've discussed. And finally, we'll be doing some targeted re-engagement to circle back with those key communities that we reached out to in 2020. Once again, BIPOC communities, low income, mobile home parks, apartment complexes, and then local businesses, renters, and students in the area. All right, with that, we'll open up our Q&A session. Once again, we do have a lot of folks that have populated our chat, so thank you for giving us some starter questions to get things kicked off. We do have the option tonight, if you'd like to ask your question out loud, you can click the raise hand function that is found next to your name in the participants panel. There'll be a little hand just like the one on the screen. You'll click that and that'll notify me to unmute your microphone and you can ask your question out loud. That chat, if you haven't found it yet, it's in the lower right-hand side of your screen. If you're on a mobile device, you'll have to click the 3 buttons on the lower left, and that'll open up your chat panel. And make sure everyone is selected here in your 2 option. That'll make sure that all the panelists can see it. And if you're joining live tonight, which you are, questions can also be submitted by calling 763-219-5503. So to get things kicked off here, what questions do you have? What are your concerns? And what else are you interested in learning about here tonight? We'll get things started in our chat. And Ryan, I'll go ahead and have you answer this first one. I see that you are unmuted. We have an attendee asking about a study that was done back in 2012 that was taken to the federal highway. They were hoping that some projects would come out of that study, wondering why nothing has happened from that 2012 study.
Yeah, sure, I can take that. I think that's referring to the Century College study. And so that part is north of this current effort. But yeah, there's still improvements that are identified in that study, and we're still working on funding and trying to find funding to get some of those improvements implemented. And that's really kind of where that's at. Is it's not in our normal program of maintenance and preservation. It's more outside of that program. So it's trying to identify those funds and match them to the project. Great,
thanks, Ryan. Brandy, I'll pass this next one over to you. Was any data gathered of crashes by age of the driver?
We do have that data, and I don't recall it showing us anything of concern so that we would have to note it, but we can look at it. But I just don't recall that was anything, a significant factor in crashes out here.
All right. I've seen a few hands up as well. I'm going to take care of a couple of these questions that came in early in the meeting, but I do see you folks raising your hands. We'll get you unmuted here soon. Next question, we'll go back to Ryan for this one. Are we coordinating with other planned projects, such as the BRT on the south end of the project?
Yes, we are. That's the Gold Line project on the south end of the project. And as we move into future phases of the study, a big component of that would be is how does that transit system all connect with one another?
Great. Ryan, I'll keep you on for this next one as well. What future growth is anticipated near 94 and Hudson? The participant said it's very developed already in that area. Do we know that?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much where it's going to be. I don't think there's much planned development at all. There might be some redevelopment stuff with Gold Line that might come in the corridor, but as far as 120, it's pretty much developed already. So
great.
I think there might be some growth shown for 3M, Ryan, that might be driving a little bit of that.
potentially, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
3M might grow, but I mean, as far as the area around it, I don't think there's anything planned.
Okay. All right, I'll move over to a couple folks that have their hands raised. Stan, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute your mic. Go ahead. You'll have to accept the request to unmute your microphone. There you go.
I'll probably try to keep my comments to just some comments, and then try to keep it to that. There's a lot of good people on this open house, about over 50. I just wanted to thank you, Ryan and Brandy, Kurt, and I know we have Adam Josephson on here. Really an excellent overall study. My only comment then to expand on the study just made me to look at some areas that would take it to a higher level is that there's some really knowledgeable people about this corridor, Century Corridor, on this call, on this conference. But if we would have had several workshops just to raise perspective of potentials in that, then I think the answers would have been a little more probing. But I'm just going to bring up some areas of things that weren't studied. Again, excellent study. I think these are things I'm bringing up that probably would eventually get studied. The arterial bus rapid transit, it's on Met Council's list, not listed high enough, but some of these improvements would make it very feasible. That would be level boarding. And when you compare Century College to the north to 3M, those are two magical destination points. And then you combine the Gold Line to the south and the future Rush Line, which is now the Purple Line. There's potential to connect it to those two. And then just redevelopment, both as county commissioner, I represent all the cities along Century Avenue on the Washington County side. So there's literally, well, I represent 8 cities, but about 6 of them are right along this corridor. The SMART corridor, and then, you know, that's about it. I just think a great study. Thank you so much. Look forward to learning more in the months to come, though, as far as other added value things. Oh, my last point, I think with improvements along the corridor, the road conditions, the safety, I think you would find people driving the length of the corridor. I think often many of the people get off on other major thoroughfares like 40th, Stillwater Avenue it's a frustrating road to drive. So I think they're only on it for a minimum amount of time, and maybe that wasn't factored in. So I handled all my thoughts on that one. I'll try to be quiet. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Stan. Our next attendee with their hand up, Jen Brayton, go ahead and unmute you. You'll have to unmute on your end as well, Jan. We may be having some issues on Jan's microphone. Jan, if you want to go ahead and submit your questions in the chat, we're going to keep moving here, but I'll send you one more option to unmute. Okay, no worries. All right, our next question. Let's pass this over to Ryan. Question about construction. When will it begin and when will it end? Do we know approximate timeline for that?
We don't really yet. You know, we know that there is a maintenance and preservation need on the corridor. We're looking at when that would need to happen. I think really the whole purpose of the study is to try and figure out what other things need to be looked at and what other funding opportunities can be explored to make that a complete roadway. Some of the things that Stan brought up in his comments are some of the things that will certainly be looked at in future phases of the study as we look to build the roadway that everybody wants out here instead of just a plain maintenance and preservation roadway. That being said, I know there will need to be something done in the not too distant future because of the condition of the roadway. So we're probably looking in that. I guess maybe I'll turn it over to Adam on that, Kurt, is kind of the timing of those improvements.
Sure. Finding Adam. Adam, go ahead and unmute yourself. There you go.
Here I am, Adam Josephson with MnDOT and the East Area Manager. Yeah, right now, from a MnDOT standpoint, we're really looking at what it would take to maintain the corridor pavement. We certainly know there's a lot more needs out there, but from a funding standpoint, where things are, we'd be looking at pavement and other minor improvements along the corridor, and we're probably in that, I don't know, 3 to 5 years out before even that would occur. But certainly understand there's a lot more needs out here, and the timing of additional improvements out here really will be funding driven.
Great, thanks, Adam. Brandy, pass this next one to you. Attendee is asking about the issue of curbing or no curbing. Has that been discussed or considered yet?
Well, if you look at our criteria, stormwater is part of that question will be asked, as well as even costs. So curb and gutter is one way to, and the storm sewer that goes below it is one way to address that issue. But it also comes at a cost. So yes, absolutely, curb and gutter will be looked at when we look at potential solutions along the corridor.
Great, thank you. We do have a few other comments in here. I am just going to stick to the questions that we have for our panelists, but anyone that has submitted comments, we do have those recorded here, and those will be added to our consideration list. Brandy, I'll keep you on for this next one. Are we aware that there is a daycare at Century and 10th families and teachers that walk to access it?
I guess I gotta look at, let me look at one of my slides here to see if we showed anything there. I'm glad you're bringing it up because in case we don't know it, we will make sure that we're looking at it. And trying to find it. I'll just say we'll take note and want to make sure that, you know, we want to consider all that. So thanks for that comment.
Great. Brandy, I think you can answer this next one as well. What are we envisioning at Century Avenue and Trunk Highway 36, that intersection of Highway 36 and Highway 120? Is grade separation a possibility?
Yeah, grade separation will be looked at. We know that there's substantial congestion right there. So there are a lot of different ways to solve that problem, and we'll be looking at you know, the various ways to solve it, and grade separation is one of those solutions. So yep, we'll be looking at that.
Great. Keep you here as well, Brandy, for this next one. Intersection of Highway 120 and Ivy. Attendee is asking that a stoplight be added there. Has that been considered, or maybe it'd be worth talking over the criteria needed to add a stoplight at an intersection?
Ivy, okay. I think we'll take note of that. You always got to balance the number of signals on a roadway. You don't want to add too many, because if you do that, the roadway becomes really difficult to get through. However, we do know that you know, without a signal, some intersections are really difficult to use. So I guess all I can say is we'll take note of that, and as we're looking at the mobility improvements or spot location improvements, we'll consider that. And right now, I'm also just looking through my slides to see if we had a crash history there. I imagine it's really hard to get on and off of it right there, so we'll take note of that.
Great. All right, turning back over to a couple folks that have their hands up. Bill, I see your hand up, so I'll go ahead and unmute your microphone and you can ask your question.
Okay, here, I think I found it. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're coming through.
Yeah, there was a study done on 36 and 120. Has that been shelved? How does that coordinate with what's happening?
Yeah, I can take that. So this is Ryan. So yeah, there was a study done at 36 and 120. It really comes down to a funding at this point. And so yes, that study was done. And it's fairly old now, so it'll probably need to be refreshed if money does become available. But yeah, there's not currently any funding identified for those improvements, and that's kind of where we're at.
I'm on the north end of that project where I live, and the south end of it where I work. So if I had to choose, I'd choose Highway 36 before the stuff in the south.
I understand. Yep.
Thank you much.
Thank you. All right, Ryan, question for you here. What have major employers like Century College and FedEx and others on the north end of this project had to say about the study?
So we did do some targeted engagement with Century College, and trying to think if we had. Brandy, do you know if we did a focus group about FedEx?
Oh, I don't know if we did. I don't think we did. I think it was Century.
Right. So we did do the one with the college, and the college was really interested in what we heard was a lot of bike and ped needs and access to the college in a safe and convenient way is what we heard. But it was really a lot of bike and pedestrian stuff that we heard at the college.
Great. A few more comments here. Here's a question. Ryan, we'll keep you on for this one. Are there plans for a route from Century College to 94 to take advantage of the BRT plans?
Yeah, that's kind of what Stan was talking about earlier, and that really hasn't been looked at too much yet. It'll probably come out with more of the alternatives as the alternatives are developed. That's referring to the bus rapid transit along 120 and possibly connecting that down to the Gold Line. And so that is something that we've heard that certainly will be a consideration moving forward.
Thank you. A lot of good comments have come in as well here. Thank you all for submitting those. We did have some clarification on the curbs question, Brandy. They were more concerned with curbs being a hazard for bicyclists, especially if the lanes are narrow.
Yeah,
Is that going to be considered?
sure. Yep. It all depends on where you put the bicyclists. You could put them on the road, or you could, you know, separate them from the road. So yeah, we'll definitely, that'll be a consideration.
Ryan, one for you here. How's this project coordinating with a strategic plan for 36 at 120?
I think that's referring to the possible grade separated interchange at 36 and 120, and yeah, it is coordinating very well. I think it'll obviously it'll be more of a consideration as we move forward into the alternatives phase and looking how those two pair together. But that'll definitely need to be that previous study will be incorporated into the results as we move forward.
Great. Brandy, how about roundabouts? Are they being considered along this route?
Yeah, I have no reason to believe they wouldn't be. If we see that there's a potentially good use for them, we'll definitely consider them. A lot is on the table at this point in time. I would say I would definitely not say no to many questions about what we're considering. Lots of solutions out there that we'll consider.
Okay. Kind of going along with that, another road to note is Long Lake. They're saying this can get backed up depending on the time of day. Have we made any considerations for that area yet? Any plans?
I'm trying to find that area here. Oh, Long Lake. Is that an intersection? I'm like trying to remember if I know
Yeah.
every one of these intersections.
Yeah, it's the first intersection north of 694, and so that was part of what we considered with the Century College study, Kurt. So yeah, it can get backed up depending on the time of day. That really plays into the FedEx stuff that comes out of there, the traffic, and so it was all part of that Century College piece, that northern piece study that we looked at that time, and so yeah.
Great. A follow-up on the FedEx question. Sounds like this attendee is wanting to know if we do plan on talking to them. Doesn't sound like we have yet.
We have
Ryan,
in the
is
past.
that something that?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we have in the past with that, with those Long Lake improvements and also with the Century College study. It is just north of the part that we were studying. We were stopping it at 694 because of that previous study to the north had been done. But yeah, it's definitely something that we'll continue to engage in the future as we try to develop those improvements along this roadway.
Sounds good. Ryan, how about north of 694? Do you want to comment on any future plans there?
Yeah, that's what we were just talking about. It's the same area. So yeah, we've heard as we've been studying this, really the reason why we took it to the south was because we had this previous study with roundabouts identified near Century College, and that project just really, like a lot of things on this corridor, it's really piecing that funding together and trying to find those solutions that work in those time frames. And as many of the people on the call know, it's not just one funding source. It's piecing that funding source together across many different agencies and many different areas. And so we have that study. We know that it was fairly well received, and it is something that we're trying to figure out how to implement that in the future.
Great. Brandy, I'll pass this one over to you. Attendee is suggesting a bike route on safer residential streets when possible. Is that a possible alternative that could be considered for this study?
I'm looking at the grid, and there's definitely not, there's just a lot of gaps, caused by 36, caused by the railroad, caused by a lot of things. So I would say that, all that's always on the table, but when we see a lot of gaps, we have to figure out, well, is that adequate, or would we have to somehow try to get that gap, try to close it. So I know the grid is definitely not very, there's not much of a grid, I should say, out there, or at least there's a lot of gaps in the grid.
Makes sense. Brandy, how about the intersection of Minnehaha and Century Avenue? Anything to note about considerations for that intersection?
Yeah, that intersection definitely showed up as an area where the crashes are pretty high, or actually considered high, significantly higher than other intersections, as well as some backups. So that's definitely kind of a key location from a vehicle mobility perspective, and safety, that we need to think about as we come up with solutions here.
One thing to add there, Brandy, is there's a lot of access there too that's contributing to a lot of those problems. And so we think that that's probably part of the reason why there's a lot of crashes there. And so as we look to move the study forward, it's how do we increase safety and for the intersection as a whole.
Yep.
All right, final question, kind of about that same area. Commenters wondering when the roadway between Minnehaha and Stillwater was resurfaced and repainted. Ryan, do you know when that happened?
We did have a utility project a while, like I want to say it was just a couple of years ago, but it's probably a little bit longer than that. We did go through and do a bunch of the utilities companies came through and did a bunch of work there, and then they put it back, which almost made it look like it was a project, but it was more just utility work along the roadway. And so I think that was 2 to 3 years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Great. All right, that's all that's in our chat for questions. I'll check in over with She, who was on our questions line. She, did we receive anything on your end?
We did not.
Okay, great, thank you. Oh, we had one more question come in here. Once again, talking about north of 694. Just to clarify, will this project address north of 694 to FedEx? Ryan, do you want to?
So we're evaluating that right now. Currently, the study only stops at 694 for this purpose and need segment that the problems that we're identifying right now stops at 694. There is a potential to potentially that didn't sound great, but there is an opportunity to possibly include that section in the future study of this roadway, and we're evaluating whether to do that or not right now. So I can't give you a definite answer, but it is something we've heard. A lot of people are interested in that northern piece of roadway.
Great. Ryan, how about any prioritization that's happening on any area of this corridor? Are any spots a main priority at this time?
They're really not. It's really kind of we're trying to get to that point, and so we're still in the problems and the kind of the criteria of how we're going to evaluate those problems stage. After we kind of identify those, the next part is looking at kind of those potential solutions, and then once we have those, then they can kind of get ranked, and as you know, priorities, we can solicit funds and try to find funding opportunities to tailor those projects from there. But yeah, that's kind of the next part of the study.
Okay. Ryan, this one for you as well. Will eminent domain be used to widen the road anywhere?
Yeah, we don't know at this time. I mean, it's really, that gets into the alternatives that are selected and evaluated. So really don't have any information at this time about any of that, because it really gets into what those different alternatives look like.
All right. A few more questions coming in here. What efforts are being done to go after bike ped specific funding? Ryan, do you want to answer that one too?
Yep. So we have been talking to our partners on this corridor, mainly the city and the county and Stan from the county and all of our partners to look at those potentials. I know, Stan, do you want to kind of talk about some of that quickly?
Let me unmute Stan here quick.
Could you repeat what you wanted me to comment on? I wasn't quite sure.
Sure. They're asking about the efforts to specifically seek out some bike and ped funding for the corridor for some future improvements.
Well, that would I couldn't imagine this corridor being redone without a headway, bikeway, but I think we would break it down in phases. I've heard that the whole MnDOT potentially would want to turn this back to both Ramsey and Washington counties, and it could be well over $200 million. I think you'd break it down. To me, the highest priority. So it's all priorities. I think you really can't put in a trail before you really get the roadway set, you know, with proper turn lanes or roundabouts or whatever's needed. But I think the first priority is really the 36 at Century interchange. There's been fatalities there. It's just by far the highest priority. So that would be I believe, the first step. But anything's on the table. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I just wanted to mention that we're working with all the local officials to try and build those partnerships and let's seek out those opportunities for funding and applying for those as we can.
Yeah, thank you. This study and what you're doing so far has been excellent. Thank you again.
All right. Not seeing anything else in the chat. Maybe give folks a few more moments here if any final questions or comments come to mind. Oh, here's one. Is funding being actively sought at this time? I think we're talking general funding for this corridor.
Yeah.
Ryan, do you want to talk to that one?
Yeah, so that really gets at what Stan and I were just talking about, is we're really trying to identify what those potential solutions look like, and then ranking those solutions, and then looking for those funding opportunities. But we have been engaging all of our local elected officials and state representatives to help to bring them along in this process and look for those opportunities that might present themselves to apply for those different opportunities.
Okay. How about any federal funding opportunities? Well,
It kind of goes along with that same thing. Yeah, it's really developing those partnerships and looking for those priority projects and looking at those solutions that are developed for this corridor, and then looking for those grants or those potential funding opportunities that might be available. So they kind of come hand in hand.
okay.
Just to add to that, I mean, that's one reason why we have federal highway. We're doing this study is we're bringing federal highway along so that when those opportunities present themselves, we can roll these projects out pretty quickly.
Great. We have a call-in question here. Brandy, we'll have you answer this one. Is the project going to reach Brookfield? And if yes, will there be any traffic control for pedestrians at that intersection?
All right. So I'm looking at a map. Can somebody point to me where Brookfield is really quick? There's a lot of intersections here. Does anybody know?
I think it's way on the north end. I'm looking right now as well.
So if it's in our project area, yes, I would say for sure we'll be looking at that. And whether there's any control, if it's in our project area, yeah, we're going to be looking at different ways to make these crossings better for walking and biking, and that may be, you know, specific control for that mode. That is on the table, I would say. And if that is located in our project study area, then yes. And I'm glad you noted it. We'll keep that in mind. I guess I'm just not sure that it's in our study area. There's a lot of intersections in this, and I don't have them all memorized, unfortunately, and they're not all showing up on my map. Oh, it's south of 94. That's what somebody says. It's south of 94.
Yep.
Yeah, this one is going to the 94 ramps and not going south of that at this point in time.
Okay. Looks like we may have missed a question here. Thanks for bringing this one back up. Sorry we missed this. Is there a consideration for a walking path along Silver Lake to make the connection around the lake? Would that be part of this project, Brandy?
I guess I'm not sure what you mean by along the lake. You know, if that means, because I can see that Silver Lake is not necessarily 100% next to the road. We're definitely going to be focusing on what we need to do to Highway 120. And if there's specific connections that need to be made beyond the road, we can maybe say that that is something that should be considered for future different projects, maybe by the city. But definitely we're focusing on the highway, and things that might connect to it that don't exist today would likely, you know, end up with something in a different jurisdiction. And you can tell me if I'm wrong, Ryan.
No, that you covered it.
Some clarification on that one. You said that Joy Park Silver Lake Pass would connect to 120.
Yep, there's a potential along there if there is a trail that runs. If there's a trail identified in the future improvements that runs along 120, certainly it would connect to that path that goes into the park there. It's just off of 120 is what we're talking about, that those improvements would be done by a different agency, and how they connect into the trail that runs along longitudinally along 120.
Gotcha. Brandy, we may have had you looking for the wrong street. Sounds like we meant to say Brookview instead of Brookfield earlier.
I'm guessing that's still south of 94, though. I just don't see it on my map.
Okay. No worries. Right. Another comment that came in there. Thank you for that. All right, we do still have some more time to answer questions. So if there are any further comments or questions, please do copy those into the chat for us or raise your hand. We'll give a few more moments here just in case something comes to mind for folks. If something comes to mind after this, we do have that survey once again that's online. There are opportunities in there to leave open-ended comments that the project team will see. So please do check that out after this. All right, not seeing any further questions come in. All right, so with that, I'll turn it back over to Ryan for a few closing remarks.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight and the wonderful input that we received. Oh, I see Stan's got his hand up. Did we get Stan? Stan, are you good? Or Kurt, do you want to unmute Stan?
Yep, just unmuted him.
Thank
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Again, thanks for the survey, all the work and all the good participation. I know there are two counties, Ramsey and Washington County. I'm in a lot of contact with Victoria Reinhardt. She's very supportive. I don't think she's on this call. Our two counties will work together, and we really want to work in harmony with the state of Minnesota. And we don't want to get in conflict with any pursuits of the state. We'll probably look at some parallel paths in the funding area, working with Senator Wigger, working with our cities to try to get some of that planning on the engineering money on that 36th century. Again, we want to be complementary to anything the state does. The cities, I know there's a lot of elected on this, and they should just stay tuned. I think we're looking at a coalition amongst all the cities for that we can keep the momentum going. So just in closing, I think I had a captured audience here. So I thought I'd give them the perspective of the approach we're pursuing from the county perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. So yeah, that sums it up very well. So really want to thank everybody for being here tonight and giving your input. I want to encourage you all to go and fill out that survey because we'll be able to see that and take all that into consideration. And then also, if you want to go back and watch this again, if you missed something, it will be available on the website to watch it and take notes. And really appreciate everybody here being here, and look forward to working with you all in the future.
Thanks, Ryan. We did just have two more quick questions come in. If we've got time to answer, did you want to speak about the design timing and what the next stages are?
Sure. Yep. So we are looking at we're going to be moving into a phase 2 of this study, and that'll be coming kind of in the probably in the late winter, early springtime, and we will be moving into a study of the next phase, which is looking at different alternatives and how they meet those evaluation criteria that Brandy outlined, and then prioritizing things as we move forward. And then, like Stan talked about, there's probably going to be a parallel track with some different things going on, some different studies and that kind of thing.
Great. Our other question that came in refers to a reconstruction on Highway 36 back in 2007. They're wondering why the 120 intersection wasn't included in that reconstruction. Brian, do you recall anything about that project?
I believe they're referring to, we had a small project to, it was a congestion and safety grant. And so it was a fast tracked project. And it wasn't enough money to do like a full grade separated interchange. And so what we did is we lengthened the left turn lane from Highway 36 onto 120. And then also we rebuilt the signals at 694 and 120. And so that was really kind of a spot improvement project. And so we maximized the dollars that we had, and we weren't able to do everything that we wanted to address those concerns.
All right, great, thank you. All right, that's it for our questions. Thanks again, everyone, for attending our meeting tonight. Everyone that's on the project team, I'll go ahead and have you stay on. We'll remain online for a short debrief here. But everyone else, thanks for joining us. Please enjoy the rest of your evening, and we look forward to working with you in the future.